Welcome to our virtual event, a live conversation with Cheech Marin. I'm Polly Nordstrand, curator of Southwest Art for the Colorado Springs Fine Art Museum, Fine Art Center, at Colorado College. It was my pleasure to be the organizing curator for the traveling exhibition Papel Chicano Dos, which is currently on view at the museum. And tonight we welcome Cheech Marin to talk about his collection, his commitment to sharing artworks, and plans for a new museum dedicated to art by Chicana and Chicano artists. I have some questions in mind, but please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them. Cheech Marin really needs no introduction, as many of us know him from his career as an actor and comedian. It might be a surprise to some, though, to learn that he is also an art collector and has been building his collections since the 1980s. He now has over 700 artworks in his home, and I want to say welcome, Mr. Marin.
Thank you very much. It was nice to be here, Polly.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started collecting art?
Wow. It comes from being Catholic, I think, because I was raised Catholic, and then you'd go to churches or to mass, and when you're little, you go, how long does this thing last? And you look up at the ceiling, and generally the ceilings were painted with some images. And as a young kid, like 5, 6, 7 years old, I would look and there, okay, this bunch of guys in sheets and clouds, and why are they barbecuing that guy in the corner? So right away I was intrigued. There's something about art that's terrifying and wonderful at the same time. So I was always a collector of something. I got from a very early age, whether it was marbles or baseball cards or whatever you have, but I had a passion for codifying and collecting the whole set, So very early in my education, I took an art appreciation class. It was an extracurricular class in high school, and I started appreciating world art. Oh, and before that, even my cousins, I had a group of cousins. They were all very, very academic and intelligent and hardworking, and we formed together to learn more stuff than they were teaching us in school. And so I got assigned in this group to learn about art. Okay, how do you do that? Same way you learn about anything. I went to the library and took out every art book that they had, or they would let me anyways. And I started going through art, Western art, basically. Then opening the books. Okay, that's Cézanne, that's Picasso, that's Degas, and I learned about Western art that way. And so when I finally got to the point where I could have enough money to collect art, I got turned on to Chicano artists who had started really in the late 60s, 68, 69, because they were the visual face of the Chicano civil rights movement. And they worked with Cesar Chavez and people like that, Dolores Huerta. And they were the sign painters and the backdrop makers and anything that they required art for their movement. And so I started getting turned on to what these artists were doing, and they were all university and or art school trained artists. So it wasn't backyard hobbyists. These were serious artists. And so right away, because of my background in art, I recognized right away that these artists are saying something, and they're really good. And they're, it's like discovering the Beatles for the first time. You've heard this music before, because it's based on Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis and all those guys, but it's their own interpretation of it and the advancement of that interpretation, and that's what the Chicana painters were doing. They were making great strides while saying about something specific. They were describing the condition of the Chicano community as they saw it. And not being interpreted by some outside force. And so it became a recognized school of art in some circles. In some circles, they thought, well, Chicanos don't make real fine art. They make agitprop folk art. And every Chicano artist I've told that to, they tell me, they look at me the same way and they go, what's agitprop folk art? that we make that I don't even know about. And so that was the beginning of the journey. And as an inveterate collector and that I've been since I can remember, I started collecting art. And luckily for me, the big pieces, the big masterpieces of the early Chicano artists were still out there for purchase. And I was the perfect storm. I knew what the art was. I had the money to collect it, very important. And also I had the notoriety and the public persona in order to disseminate these idea of Chicano art. And I've come to the conclusion that because of the description and the longevity of this group and this school of art and the description of a community and the widespread dissemination of this from California to New York City right now, and the longevity has been over since the late 60s, that they've been doing the same kind of thing, the description, because the description keeps changing, because new generations come in, that as far as I'm concerned, I think that the Chicano School of Art is the most important American school of art in its history, and it continues to this day. So we're trying to get the idea of Chicano art is American art. It is not separate from American art. It is part of the American art scene from the beginning. It's as important as Ashcan School or Hudson River Valley School or abstract expressionists, and it continues, and it's growing and growing and growing as we speak. So I'm really proud to have been instrumental in the dissemination of it from the beginning, and now we've come to the point where I've been given a museum to house the collection in Riverside, California, which will open the coming spring of next year. And I couldn't be prouder and more thrilled. And so we want everybody to come in there and see the Cheech. I got that name in real quickly. Well, what would we call this thing? The Cheech. That would be good. They got the Broad or the and everybody goes, yeah, we're caught up in the moment, And so it became official right away. But it's a really good place. It's a beautiful, beautiful mid-century building. It's like 66,000. And here was the clue that is supposed to happen, which I think the whole thing is about, is the square footage of this museum is 66,420 square feet, 420 being the operative number. Why did it fall on me? So I think
we were about to start the event at 4:20, but then we thought, well, it's 3:20 your time, 5:20 somewhere else, and who's going to really get it? But Colorado, we figured people might get it.
Yeah, I'll tell them about it if they don't.
So right now, a lot of museums are really looking at their collections, interrogating like what they've been committed to in the past and where they think their future is. What is it that you find that's so important about being Chicano art being part of American art? Like, what kind of drives you to that statement?
Well, it's the description of a community, of an ever-changing community that has long been ignored, and so the determination, I guess, of the school and of these artists and the influence they have not only in the art scene in general, but on each other. And that's really important. They listen to each other and what that conversation is like, and keep refining that conversation. And some agree, some don't agree, some could care less, but they keep making this art that is a description of their community. And what I found that every generation of artists that enters into this school or enters into this discussion, their first thing that they always do is give you news from the front. This is what my neighborhood looks like right now. This is what's going on in my neighborhood, as told through art. Oh yeah, that's one of those. This is from CiCi Segura González. This is Soy Chicana.
I know I've heard you talking about at least one of the works in this show that's called Backyard Hanging Fences. And you talked about that being one of the images that makes you think of like where you grew up and like what your experience is. What do you feel is important about having works like this in public venues like a museum at Colorado Springs?
Well, not only does it resonate with people who've had that same experience, I mean, I really went for that piece because I was born and raised half of my life in South Central LA, which at that time was a totally African American community with just a sprinkling of Chicanos and Asians, but just a sprinkling. And halfway through that, when I was about to turn 10, we moved from South Central LA to the Granada Hills, California, which was an all-white community. It's in the suburbs of the San Fernando Valley. And so I had the experience of one day everything was black and everybody was black in my neighborhood. And the next day, everybody was white in my neighborhood. And how do you negotiate that? And so I learned how to negotiate that by being educated, intelligent, funny, and really cute. I think that's the key.
Yeah, cute is very key.
A long way, honey.
So we have one question from our audience, and that is, do you remember what your first artwork was that you collected?
Did I collect? I think it was about 3 artists at the same time. When I first discovered Chicano art at the Robert Berman Gallery in Santa Monica, I stood in front of it. There's these paintings that he had by several artists. He had been a champion of Chicano artists throughout, and I go, I know this. What it's like if it was music, I would say I know this music. I recognize it. I know the beat. I know the lyrics. I know the heart and soul that is going. And I said, this is why aren't these people getting more shelf space? Well, there's not. They're not being recognized, and so. And that was good news and bad news. The bad news was that they weren't getting recognized, but they were toiling away in obscurity. And the good news was that, hey, there's a lot of artwork available to be bought, And at first, as any collector does, you wanted something green to go over the couch, It's like, okay, well, that looks good. But in answer to your question, which I will eventually get to, George Yepes, I bought a piece by George Yepes. I bought a piece by Frank Romero, and I bought a piece by Carlos Almaraz. And that's a Romero piece. This is good. It's a pastel, and it's a parade of nations that supposedly goes down Wilshire Boulevard, and it has all the ethnicities that were prevalent and still are in Los Angeles. And this is one of the 2 panels. There's 2 panels of this. And Frank Romero was one of the OG Chicano painters. He was a member of a group called Los Four, which was Frank Romero, Carlos Almaraz, who was the founder, Magoo, and Beto de la Rocha. And also that I've learned very recently, although I didn't know at the time, is that there was a 5th member. Now I'm blanking on her name. Let Melissa help me out. My memory is going. But
Judith Hernandez.
Judith Hernandez, right?
Okay.
And
thanks, Melissa, for helping us out with that one.
She was the only female member of the group that came in after they had started. And wonderful work. She has a show up right now at the Museum of Latin American Art in Long Beach. It was the first Chicana artist to have a solo show at that venue. Wonderful works of art and pastel. I mean, and just like. She's really good. I just talked to her the other day, and now we've just from the museum acquired one of her pieces, and we're in the process of acquiring a couple more. Wonderful artists, and so that's what we're. The basis of the opening of the museum is my collection is the foundation of it, but we're going to keep adding to the collection as we go on. And it is a cultural center, not just a repository for my collection of paintings. It is a cultural center that will deal with all cultural aspects of Chicano art, film, writing, academic history, and anything else we can think of that we got. Robert Rodriguez, I've been talking to him, and he's going to come in and be involved in the film department. Yeah.
Do you,
So we're,
when you were collecting some of these works, the earlier works from the 80s and 90s, did you get a sense that you were collecting something that would be, for future generations? Like, as a curator, I think of the mural maquette by Romero as something that's like a historic piece that
Mhm.
has like a research as well as an art appreciation value. Did you feel like you were building something like that when you were getting those specific pieces?
Yes, actually, I did. For some reason, because of my history of collecting anything, I knew that when it gains critical mass, that's when people start paying attention to it. And the fact that other people were interested in this art, not on the level and the commitment that I was, but and that had nothing to do with being Chicano. They just appreciated what great art it is. And then they kept, so there was attention on this art. So I says, well, if anybody who doesn't have that same cultural experience is interested in the art, then it has broad appeal, you know. And so it is resonating. And I had a lot of foreigners, not necessarily other Mexicans, but from all over the world. They would come and I would show, as I started amassing this, so I would show the collection. Oh, and they would appreciate, that looks like Picasso and that looks like Degas. They really related to the connection that they had to world art. And so I started collecting this, and then you get to the point, and I made a lot of friends in the art world, and both collectors, museum people, gallerists, and they all told me the same thing. Well, you got to show this. I mean, it doesn't look good under the bed, You got to go out because after you get your house full, what are you going to do with it, So I go, oh well, how do you show it? Well, you get a museum show, and then how do you do that? Well, you get sponsors. Oh, okay. How do you do that? And that's a long process. That from the time we thought of actually putting on a show, a museum show that would tour, to the time that LACMA, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, joined up the show, that was 10 years. And I was going in every corporate boardroom of America and doing our little song and dance, and till finally the Target stores and Hewlett Packard stepped up to finance the creation of the show, and then the Target stores stayed with it through the 7 years of its run out, and it was amazing, and that really pushed us over the edge. That we're now it's recognized wherever it goes, or not wherever it goes, but I'm going to Russia next week, so see how they do over there. any Chicano Russians.
Right, but you've been showing the works for over 20 years. That's
Yeah.
the history that I've found online anyway, is that your museum exhibitions have been traveling for 20 years.
Yeah.
And this show has gone from California to Texas to Wyoming, and now it's like finishing up here in Colorado Springs. Um,
That looks great. Yeah. Wow, this is the first time I'm seeing it installed.
So
Ah,
yeah, this is a rendering of our installation. For anyone who hasn't seen the exhibition, Papel Chicano Dos has works from California artists, artists that were born in the U.S. and in Mexico, and there's artists from Texas. And I do know you don't have any artists from Colorado in your collection, so I'm
not
hoping
yet.
that when you come, that you'll meet with us and we can show you around and introduce you.
I would love, my greatest thrill is discovering new artists. It really is. I mean, I love to walk into a gallery and see a painting that I've never seen before that rings a bell. You can stand there, and I'm always asked, well, so what is your criterion that you determine what pieces to collect and add to the collection? And I said I have to stand in front of the painting and go, wow. And that wow is informed by a long history of learning about art and seeing art, and I go by what the impact as a whole is on me when I first see it.
That was one of the unexpected things about the show when we took it. I was expecting, because I knew the works were on exhibit in your home, that I was expecting much smaller scale pieces, and I was really surprised, by this really large piece by Gronk in the background, and the scale of a lot of these works is really large. We have a question from the audience from Patricia. She wanted to know how do you collect directly from the artist, or do you go to auction houses? You had mentioned galleries, and then her question isn't directly related to how many do you collect per year, and maybe were there years that were higher for collecting and then you had a lull? People are just interested in what your practice is for collecting.
The single most important aesthetic point that I determine what I collect is the paintings have to haunt me. Usually if it's a really good painting and I'm really interested and it's more than I can afford, I would dream about them. They would haunt me in my dreams. I would pull it up if there was an image available and look at it again. Some pieces of art I've looked at for 4 or 5 years before I acquired it, but I'm a working actor, so it's like I got to be working in order to collect art. I'm not a billionaire that says, "Hey, send over 2 tons of that art," So it's very precise what I do collect. But I was in the very fortunate position to have celebrity. And celebrity is a big lure to get you into a museum, which maybe before you wouldn't have gone in. Let's Cheech, he's collecting art. Okay, well, let's go say, oh, I like this. And that's always the reaction. I don't know if I love or hate Chicano art, but I like this. Wow, this is good, because it's always surprising what Chicano art is and how informed and well executed it is.
When we were putting up the show, like one of the, because of the diversity of the art, like that there isn't a way to hang the show that makes anyone say like, oh, I know what Chicano art is now. And I think that there was that impulse, in the 80s, right, when people like Gronk were like fighting against what is that, how does it relate? And I work with Native American artists, so there's a similar kind of approach where people, especially collectors, want it to look a certain way, have certain themes. And I think that your collection really shows how there can be like so much variety, and that the Chicano experience is not limited to one type of point of view or lifestyle, right?
Or even technique. There's a lot of different techniques involved in, but they're all describing the essential experience of being a Chicano. And it's not like, okay, well, it's like a step-by-step process. It is what I like to refer to it as they describe the sabor of the neighborhood, the taste of it, And so, and when you put all these different disparate viewpoints together in a 360, you get the whole the picture of what Chicano art encompasses, and there's a bunch of different, and there's a female point of view, there's a religious point of view, there's this historical point of view, there is an abstract point of view, and when you put them together, that's when they really make sense. Individual artists keep producing work in their own particular way and are influenced by each other. I like that part a lot. They're influenced by each other. But we've been very fortunate, and over the years of displaying the art and putting it out on tour, we've played in over 50 museums at this point, which is unheard of for a private collection, because museums don't want to do that, and I understand why. Their fear is that some collector is going to come and has a bunch of art, the museum puts it up, and it raises the value, and he cashes out. This is not my intention at all. I have never sold a piece of art after I've collected. And very early in the process, I recognized, it didn't come to a conclusion. I recognized that I was collecting in order to put it on display. This is important art. It's going to tour. And so I was in the fortunate position of not only being able to buy huge pieces. The pieces in this show are small, really in comparison to the bigger paintings I have. I have paintings that are 24 by 12 feet, you know, and it's a big, because I'm collecting in order to display this in museums, you know. And so I you know, it wasn't directly, you know, the couch had something over there over it already, you know, but people have to see this. This is my, you know. And so I started collecting giant museum size paintings right away. But I was really influenced by being in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and I was making a movie there. And every town I go to, where I'm there for over a day, I find out, I go to the museum there, if it has a good museum. I'm sure there are a lot of them. And one of my most influential paintings that I remember learning about when I was a kid was the Night Watch by Rembrandt. And it's in the Rijksmuseum there, and it's a big, you know, painting. And you always saw it in reproduction in a book. And oh, it's a nice painting. It got a lot of people in it, and they're doing this, that, and the other. And so when I went into the museum to see it in person, I was flabbergasted. It was a mural. It's a big giant painting. And I go, wow. And it really and I spent an hour, at least an hour, in front of that painting in the museum, looking at it, dissecting every single inch of it. And wow, this is incredible. But it was a big painting. And it really made an impression on me. You know, that the size size really does matter in this context. And one of my other favorite painters in the world was Johannes Vermeer. And after I did the Rembrandt viewing, I went and had lunch, had a couple glasses of wine, you know, and I walked out of the restaurant, and there was a little sign that said Vermeer this way with an arrow pointing. Okay, I got to say this, you know. That they had, and the paintings of Vermeer were minuscule in comparison to Rembrandt. They were tiny, you know. They were like the size of the pictures on my wall in back of me, or the photographs. They were like. And I was intrigued at how he had captured the stillness of a moment there, and what that meant and what it felt like to see those paintings. And I go, you know, it doesn't matter how big the painting is or how small the painting. It's what's inside the frame that counts, you know. And so that influenced me to, after I had done the other big shows, I'm going to do a show of small paintings. Because the National Museum in Washington is the one I visit every time I'm in the city. And there was one time I went there, and they had a show of small paintings. And I was intrigued, and there was a lot of people in that show. And because I came back 3 times to see the show, I recognized that there was other people that I had seen before, and they were coming back to see that show again. And I go, well, the small paintings are kind of very, very personal, and people take them personally. And if they collect them, they always make sure that they're in the room that they occupy the most, and that means the most to them. So I'm going to put together a painting of little shows, and then now we have Chicano, Papel Chicano 2. It's like having Fast and Furious 9, you know.
So I know that your museum's going to open next year, and there's been lots. Have you been following the kind of conversations that are going on about museums, like movements calling for the death of museums, and a lot of turnover in staff and some missteps by directors? It's been a rough year.
Well,
but
it's always a rough year, you know, for museums, man. You know, what I really realized, what I was signing up for after I had given the collection to the museum, is I was signed up for fundraising for the rest of my life, you know, because you want to do programs. You want to promulgate the seeing of art and the interaction with art, and that's what the goal, so that people may be inspired and influenced by what they see, especially if they see it as a younger kid, and it stays with them for the rest of their life. So that was the important aspect and element that I was going for. Museums are always under siege. Always, and the curators and the you know, and the directors and everything, because you can't please everybody. and in the end, art is subjective. I don't care what it is. It's subjective. It means something to you and may not mean the same thing to somebody else or mean anything to them. So you have to kind of develop a taste, recognize universality in something that you want everybody to see, and then put it up and see if it sticks.
Do you have any particular hopes or wishes for the Cheech when it opens? Like what kind of museum it becomes?
Well, as I got into this process and I started talking to other people involved in the museum world, and they saw what I was doing, they were on different panels that are comprised mostly of museums and directors, and they said, well, okay, we'll check back in with you in 20 years. And that's the bottom rung. That's the least amount that you can be you have to attain in order to be considered a museum, because museums come and go and they're a hard thing to keep going. Fortunately, the city of Riverside in California, where this museum is, came to me and offered me this museum. I didn't go begging on hand and feet. But I would have if I was given the opportunity. But no, they came to me and they recognized this could be a hit here in Riverside, and they offered me the museum. And it's a beautiful mid-century building. Go online and see it. It's just, and it's now they're redoing the interior. It was the town library, because in the 1880s, Riverside, California was the richest per capita city in the United States because of citrus. They grew everything citrus, oranges, grapefruits, tangelos, and they built a railroad into the groves, and then they shipped citrus in the 1880s to the rest of the world, and that's how they became wealthy. And they commissioned all these buildings, classic buildings on Mission Boulevard. This museum, the Cheech, I love saying that the Cheech is right next door to the Mission Inn, which is a National Historic Monument, and it's beautiful. So we urge everybody to, by hook or by crook, get to Riverside and see both of these things.
We have another question from our audience, and this is about the artists. You may or may not know, but Eugene is asking about the artists that come from Mexico, mm-hmm. and how did their work change their expression when they moved to the U.S.? Are there artists that you know that have had that kind of experience?
Very few, because I don't collect Mexican artists. I collect Chicano artists who were born in the United States. So they didn't come from any place. They were already here when everybody else got here, So I'm sure there is a process by which you're a Mexican and become a Chicano at some point, and everybody has an opinion about when does that occur. My definition is that when your experience and your influence outweigh in the United States outweighs your experience and influence from Mexico, then it's like changing a pollywog or a tadpole into a little frog. And that then happens. Carlos Almaraz, for instance, maybe the most recognized Chicano painter that there is, was born in Mexico, but he came into the United States at 4 years old, and they moved to Chicago, his family, and then a couple other places, and then found their home in Los Angeles. And he was the leader of Los Four. He started the collective. So it's a evolving process, But Chicano art is kind of in the big, broadest definition of it is American art that is influenced by Mexico and Mexican culture, and where that meets pop culture, that's where Chicano art gets its birth.
And I'm just checking to see if there are more questions here. Okay, looks like we might have some. I just want to go and... So you might go back into the recording, but just wanted to let you know that there's people inviting you all over the place. So someone has invited you to come to Greeley which is up in northern Colorado. So we're getting invitations for you to go here and there. And there's also a lot of enthusiasm for people to come out to Riverside. And also appreciation for your point of view. So I'm just kind of giving some of the feedback here. There was a question from Nancy, and it says, are there conversations about collaborations with other Chicanx or regional museums, such as the San Antonio or Chicago, other locations that are museums starting to approach you about their collection, about your collection?
Oh yeah, well, I've already played both of those places. The Chicano Vision, which was the original show that I put out, that was sponsored by Target stores and Hewlett Packard, and went on for 7 years. We started in the city of San Antonio, which was the other epicenter of the epicenter of Chicano art. Los Angeles, it was Los Angeles, a little bit more in San Francisco, but San Antonio, Texas, was the main areas where Chicano art was blooming, and so we decided to go into the belly of the beast to open the show, because it was a very fragile tipping point there, because Chicano, the term Chicano really it started out as a derogatory term by Mexicans to other Mexicans living in the United States. The concept being that the Mexicans who had moved from Mexico and were living in tin shacks along the border and were not living in Mexico anymore, that they were no longer truly Mexicanos because they had left their country. They were something less. They were chicos. They were Chicanos, little satellite Mexicans now living in Mexicali or Calexico or something, and so that was the kind of the concept. But as I grew and grew, and my father, who died at 93, and he was born in the early 20s, always referred to himself as a Chicano, and it was depending on where you came from and what you were involved in, was either a compliment or an insult, so the people that declared, and it's always a voluntary category. There's no box in the sense as that you can check and say Chicano. There's a Hispanic box, you can do that, but that's it, so and so it's the recognition factor. Well, wait a minute, we're not even being counted in the census because there's no box for us, but you can get a PhD in Chicano studies from Harvard University. So what's the attitude? We exist, we don't exist, and for many years we've been referred to as a phantom culture by Chicanos because we're there in plain sight and we're not seeing at the same time. So this whole movement that we're undergoing right now is kind of a step towards the recognition of that.
In some of the art worlds, there's like Black futurism, and there's indigenous futurities, and that has to do with artists that are thinking about how we move forward in the world, right? When it feels like the world is, or when we talk about inequities in society, and that we're being, if not targets of genocide, is how Native people feel, being marginalized in communities. And do you think that the art in your collection has had some of that aspect to it, where there's artists that are I don't want to say predicting the future, but like that assertion of we are here? I was reading Karen Tavallo's book on, she did a study on early exhibits of Chicano art, and one of the messages in the book is something along the lines of artists express from their own point of view. And it was an important message in her book, but it also felt like, do we really need to say that? Because non-artists, major white artists don't have to say, my art is my point of view. People just assume that. But when it comes from like a cultural voice, it seems like
Yeah.
there's, they're trying to assert an individuality as well as a future, not just a reflection of, like, I call it culture lava, where something bubbles up out of the culture, but the
Mhm.
individual is not a part of it. So,
Yeah.
do you feel like the collection has that kind of point of view in it as well?
Well, the only thing an artist really has is his point of view. It's how he sees the world, or he or she sees the world, and it's the most important thing an artist has. The other aspect of it is the striving towards recognition, and recognition kind of engenders participation, and it is, we just want to get into the game. We want a seat at the table, as everybody does. It feels they have been marginalized. They want a seat at the table, and then you can judge from there. You like it, you don't like it. Okay, I don't like all art. There's some art I think why you waste your time on this, and there's some art that, like, hey man, I could stay in front of this painting for hours, but but the point of view. And once you recognize that an artist has that point of view, you start seeing that point of view told from his perspective. It's a very important thing that all artists have it. All, even minor artists, or minor, or people that aren't even artists, when they sit down in front of a piece of paper or a canvas or a block of marble, there is something that they're trying to create, and through the ability, their technique, and their capacity to create what's in their mind in a solid form, that's where that point of view takes really sharp focus. And the more you can bring into focus what are you trying to do, the more you will communicate that to the audience. So some artists are better than others. I hate to say it, but they are. I mean, it's like some baseball players are better than others. You have the situation like in a base. I grew up playing baseball, and you have some situation where the guys in the major leagues, like plays for the Dodgers or the Yankees or the Giants, every single guy sitting on that bench was the best baseball player that anybody in his neighborhood ever saw. He was a star from little league and then high school and then college, and they sit at the end of the bench and never get to play. That's how good those players are. It's because they've been doing it all their life. Some artists are really good and never seen. And it takes a determination to be an artist, because it's a hard way to make a living. Because I'm an actor, and that's a hard way to make a living. They only see the people making zillions of dollars of every movie, or selling 2 million albums every week. It's a tough grind, man, and most people don't. To make a living as a painter, that's an accomplishment. I don't care if you have a canvas that it's all black, but if it sells, that's an accomplishment. And so it is tough, but artists really can't help being artists. They just are. There's some calling there that they have to pick up a pencil or a pen or a paintbrush or a stick of pastel and do what is in their mind or was in their hearts and was coming out of their soul. And they just don't really have a choice. The choice is whether to continue or not.
Someone had a question, if you're doing any art yourself, any visual art. I think that you do lots of creative
Yeah,
work, but
I suck so badly at that. I mean, let me tell you the story that there was both a recognition of that fact and a thing that propelled me onward. As I was in maybe first grade in school in South Central, Trinity Street School, if anybody ever knows it. And so the teacher took the whole class, I think it was right down the street to the Grand Central Market, which I lived right, and the school was right down the street from it. And the Grand Central Market grew everything that was ever grown in the world and they had it in that market. You could just banana trees and things with thorns sticking out of them, places like it, and it was amazing. And so when we got back to class, the teacher asked us to draw what impressed them the most and what they were most taken within this tour. And so I had seen these big banana squashes, and they were giant, and they were bigger than I was. They were like, over my head. And I thought, wow, I'm going to do that because those are cool. And so the teacher passed out the good paper this time and the big box of crayons. And so I set about making these big bananas, and little me standing next to them, and I got the yellow and the orange, and I blended them, and blah, blah, blah. And so the teacher was going around the class after everybody had been working for a little while and examining their art. Oh, this is very nice. I see you used all the colors of the box. Okay, that's a nice figure. It looks good. And she picked up my paper and looked at it for a long time. And she goes, well, you'll never be an artist. And it was like a knife into my heart. Okay, I won't be an artist. And I just my artistic soul just slunk off in the corner to die, But I really loved art. I knew it from the very minute I recognized what art was. I really loved art. And so I said, well, if I can't make good art, I'll learn all about it, because I still like it whether I can do it or not. I may not be the best basketball player, but I watch the Lakers every game. And so that was the push. So I knew about the art, and that was really good enough for me, because some people are better at it than others. And to this day, because I was discouraged from that, I never developed it. I never, and I mean, some things I can do naturally. I mean, just I open my mouth and I can sing. I made my first record at 5 years old, so I have confidence that I have abilities in some areas. But I didn't know art was something you could learn to do. I thought it was either you had it or you didn't, and like you were fast or tall or one of those, So I just that was my impetus, and I was really happy learning all about art, because it really gave me satisfaction.
We had one question from the audience that was, how do you find the younger emerging artists? Do you research these? Do you have people that come to you?
Yeah. Well, artists.
And also, do they find it encouraging that Cheech is like, yeah, I want your work?
Yeah. That's at this point. Yeah, absolutely. It's like, oh, it's because it's official recognition. I don't know any other Chicano collectors or have their own museum. This is the very first Chicano museum that specifically concentrated on Chicano art. So it's a long road to hoe, and and the question was, how do I find stuff?
Well, how do you find the younger artists that maybe are just emerging? They don't have a career yet.
As singular as artists are, they're also very generous at the same time, and they turn me on to other artists. Oh, you got to see this other girl that I'm instructing right now. They're really good. So generally, I get turned on by other artists and some gallery owners that I mean, their impetus is to sell a painting, which is, I understand. my interest is to sell a joke, but I get turned on by other artists, and then I develop relationships with the artists themselves. Generally, I buy straight from the artist, but I really want to encourage Chicano galleries and Chicano art dealers to exist, because that's how the word gets spread, And so, but I mean, buying art is not for everybody, and so but they can appreciate it for free all the time.
That's very true. Anna has a question. She wanted to know, who do you think are the most influential Chicano artists working today?
Working today, well, the OGs are starting to die off. I mean, they're older. And Carlos Almaraz, who was like the leader of Los Four, and kind of conceptualized that I have a particular point of view and a very distinctive point of view, and he started this collective called Los Four. It sounded like a gang, huh? And it was a gang of painters, and there's only two of them left, Frank Romero and Beto de la Rocha. Carlos Almara has died, and Magoo has died, and there's they're starting to get up. I'm getting a little creaky myself, and so was the question, how do they keep going on, or what was the question? I'm sorry again?
It was more like of who are the artists that are
Oh,
influencing other artists today.
it's whoever has been teaching them is a great influence. Margaret Garcia is an artist who always has taught at whatever level, whether it's in self-help graphics or her own little studio gatherings, and she's made it a point to uh, teach kids in the community and it's not like little kids painting with Crayolas, but budding artists in the community, and she instructs them whatever she knows, and some good painters have come out of that, as well as Margaret. I always describe her as the most in, what's the word term I want to use? She's the one who's progressed the most in her technique and her point of view that I can see from people that I've drawn, but are collected. But they turned me on to other artists, and then Richard Duardo, who was the head of Modern Multiples, who was the printer of record in the Chicano community, printed everybody. He was a master printer. He's another one who's since gone on, and he turned me on to a lot of artists, and then some artists turned me on to other ones. The big turning point, I guess, in my collecting was very early in my process. I was introduced to the painters from Texas, the Chicano painters from Texas, and because it was generally recognized in Los Angeles, maybe in San Francisco, but I met a gallerist named Sonia Perez, and she had a gallery in San Antonio, and she opened up another branch in Los Angeles. And I met her, and she said, "You got to come and see the painters I brought to Los Angeles." And I did, and there was like Cesar Martinez and Jesus, a bunch of painters that, like, wow, these guys are really good. And it was different. They were a little more rural, whereas the Los Angeles painters were a little more urban. But it was the same DNA. I'm looking at these are at the least cousins, because maybe the music is a little different. The music that comes off the canvas is a little different, but it's just talking about the same thing, and I came to the realization that this is much broader and much bigger than I at first imagined, and that now it keeps going. I find other pockets of art communities, the Chicano art communities that have sprung up, especially like Corpus Christi's got a really vibrant scene right now.
Do you? We have another question from Kathy, and she's wondering if when you meet the artists, I think her question is, do the artists give you insight into your collection? That do they help you interpret and see new things in the works?
In their work, yeah, sure, they can try. Because unless the artist is standing next to you when you're looking at the painting, you're on your own, honey. And it's up to you, because painting is an invitation. Looking at a painting is an invitation to discover this world and come up with your own interpretation. It may not be the artist's interpretation, but he's not there overriding your opinion right now. So you have to become informed. And that is the big thing that I tell all people who are starting out collecting: see 1,000 paintings, and especially paintings in person. You have to see paintings in person, because there's a depth to the painting that can only be experienced fully if you're standing in front of it. And so see as many before you buy a piece of art. See as many paintings and graphic pieces and pastels and watercolors and what that you can before you form an opinion, because your opinion is bound to change the more you see a lot of other works of art. And then buy your ass off, man. I'm not hearing you.
Oh, okay. I think I was muted. I was saying my tip for the day, our main lesson from this talk is go out and buy your blank off in the art world and
Yeah.
make sure that you support the artists.
It's a tough, that's a tough road, man, to make your art or make your living being an artist. It's a tough way to go. Some people hit it really big and they do great, but it's a tough road, but it's one they have to do. Every artist that I know that paints and I have painted over a number of years experiences ups and downs, but and vogue for painting comes and goes. Something, oh, we don't look at paintings anymore, they're too yesterday, or we concepts are now what's happening. And okay, well, every museum I've ever gone to has overwhelmingly been composed of paintings, and because of the immediacy of the inspiration. The inspiration comes from your heart and soul, and then travels through your arm and onto the end of your hand into the most primitive of tools, hair on a stick. And that's how you interpret what is in your soul. So, and I really like that Mexicans have stayed and Chicanos have stayed to that handcrafted element, because it's the purest form of expression as far as I'm concerned.
So when hearing you talk about this, like this depth of feeling that you have when you see works of art, I'm thinking about how this might connect to another question we have from the audience, from Nancy. Does the art in your collection influence your acting? Like, does it emote things in you that you can draw on?
Well, sure. I mean, in some way, unconscious way. I don't go, oh, that's the key to my next character, this movie that I'm working on. Oh, yeah, that's like, no, but it influences your unconscious, and it will come out in your work, because my experience has been that all arts are interconnected, and all artists are interconnected, because they go to movies and they read books and they listen to tales and they look at other artists, and that has to have an influence on them. It just does.
Well, thank you so much, Cheech. We've come to the end of our hour, and I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you virtually. Hopefully someday it's going to be in person. Yeah, and also I just want to thank you on behalf of everyone here at the museum and your team, especially Melissa, who works with you on traveling this exhibition and sharing your collection with us, and now taking it to Riverside for its permanent home. It's really an important thing that you're doing, and I know that you know that. I just want to acknowledge it and say thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having this show at the museum in the state of Colorado. A lot of people didn't know they lived in Mexico. With the Spanish name, next to California, Nevada, Texas. But the influence is there whether you acknowledge it or not, and it is for the good. It is for the good. Art can only enrich your soul.
That's definitely true. And I want to just let our audience know that the exhibition has been extended to August 7th.
No, that's good.
Yeah, August 7th. And then it will be closing. This is after 9 venues. This exhibition, Papel Chicano will close, return to its home, and then the next time you'll see these works will be in Riverside. So we hope that everyone has a chance to come see the museum. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Come to Riverside next spring. We'll be there.
Yeah, May 2022. Everybody get your tickets. Tell your friends you're coming to stay with them. I've already booked my friend's house. So
there we go.
It's going to be great.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to show this art in the venue.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Polly.